In a world bathed in the dazzling glow of Hollywood, there are icons, legends who seem almost untouchable. But in the end, even they cannot outrun the sudden arrival of death. These stars once lived larger than life, voices that shook stadiums, athletes who outran history, actors who shaped entire generations. Yet in one unforeseen moment, everything fell silent. No farewell tour. No final curtain call. Just a shocking end that left millions of fans in disbelief. Some collapsed before the cameras, beneath the blinding stage lights. Just yesterday they were smiling, laughing, living in the spotlight. Today they will never wake again. Who were these remarkable people? And how did their stories end so suddenly? Stay with me as we explore the 25 stories ahead and discover the answers together. Fatman Scoop, collapsed on the stage in Hampton. In the world of hip-hop, his voice was impossible to mistake. Those booming callouts, that explosive energy, the unmatched ability to ignite a crowd. He wasn't just a performer, he was a force. From the legendary anthem, Be Faithful, to stages around the world, Fatman Scoop was the heartbeat of every party. But on the night of August 30th, 2024, beneath blinding lights and roaring speakers, his heart could no longer keep pace with the life he lived. Hampton Park, Connecticut, 9:42 p.m. The air pulsed with energy. Fatman Scoop stood at center stage, shouting his iconic chants, commanding the crowd like only he could. Fans roared back, a sea of voices rising with him. Then, without warning, everything changed. His body swayed, his legs buckled, and in a sudden, heavy instant, he collapsed to the stage like thunder striking without a cloud. The music cut out. The crowd froze. The band fell silent. For a heartbeat, the entire park stood still, then panic erupted. Screams tore through the air as medics rushed the stage. CPR began immediately, desperate hands fighting for every second, every breath, every chance. But his body gave no response. An ambulance screamed toward the stage, tires shrieking against the pavement. The crowd split apart in stunned fear as Fatman Scoop was lifted onto a stretcher. Someone shouted, their voice breaking through the chaos. He's not moving. At 10:07 p.m., the hospital confirmed the unthinkable. Fatman Scoop was gone. A stroke, likely heart-related. The same heart that had powered decades of relentless energy, booming performances, and unforgettable nights had given out in the very place he loved most, the stage. Moments earlier, Hampton Park had been shaking with music and celebration. Now it stood in eerie silence. A legendary voice had fallen quiet, right in the middle of the party he helped create. Microphone broken heart. Luther Lindsay. A fatal fall inside the ring. Luther Lindsay was a pioneering black wrestler who carved a path for future generations across America's wrestling arenas. With tremendous strength, flawless technique, and an indomitable fighting spirit, his career was filled with triumph. Fans saw him as a legend, an unbreakable warrior who seemed to know no defeat. But no one could have imagined that his match on February 21, 1972, would become the final chapter of his life. Charlotte, North Carolina. That night, the arena pulsed with energy. Lindsay stepped into the ring to face Bobby Paul. Powerful grapples. Precise strikes. Everything unfolded like a masterclass. The crowd erupted when Lindsay trapped his opponent in a slick hold and secured the pin. But he wasn't finished. With a confident grin, he climbed the top rope, preparing to deliver the final blow. The arena fell into breathless silence. Then he leaped, landing perfectly, crashing down onto his opponent. The referee dropped to the mat. 1, 2, 3. The bell rang. Victory. Luther Lindsay had won. But then, something strange happened. He stayed draped over his opponent, completely still. The referee leaned in and tapped his shoulder. No response. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as celebration turned to uneasy confusion. Medics rushed into the ring. They checked for a pulse. Nothing. Before the stunned eyes of thousands, his body went still. A sudden heart attack had struck at the very peak of his triumph. In the exact moment of victory, Luther Lindsay left this world as a winner. A tragic final curtain, where the wrestling ring became his last stage. Prince. The tragedy in the elevator of a legend. Prince, an irreplaceable icon of music, gave the world timeless masterpieces like Purple Rain, When Doves Cry, and Kiss. He wasn't simply a singer or a songwriter. He was a creative force of nature, a fearless artist who refused to follow rules and instead rewrote them. Prince never stood still. He kept reinventing himself, pushing artistic boundaries, transforming every stage he touched into a universe entirely his own. But a star that burned this brightly faded in a way no one could have imagined. In the quiet of an elevator, inside the very sanctuary where he built his musical legacy. April 21, 2016. A cold Minnesota morning. Paisley Park stood in eerie silence. The halls that once vibrated with music were now still. No soaring guitar riffs. No electric energy. Something felt wrong. At 9:43 a.m., an employee arrived at the estate. Almost immediately, an uneasy feeling crept in. His footsteps echoed through the vast, empty building. When the elevator doors slowly opened, the sight before him froze his blood. Prince lay motionless on the floor. There was no movement, no breath, no life. In that instant, the world seemed to collapse. 5 minutes later, paramedics rushed to the scene, but hope had already slipped away. Prince's body was cold. His heart had stopped. An overdose of fentanyl, a powerful and deadly opioid, had silently claimed his life, unnoticed by anyone. Just a week earlier, he had stood on stage in Atlanta, delivering a mesmerizing performance, full of energy and brilliance. There were no signs that anything was wrong. 7 days later, he was gone. Paisley Park, once a sacred temple of music, became forever marked as the place where the world lost one of its most extraordinary artists, Johnny Watson. Johnny Watson. The last note of a fateful night. Johnny Watson. He wasn't just a musician, he was a legend. With dazzling guitar mastery and a magnetic stage presence, he carved his name deep into blues, soul, and funk for more than 4 decades. His music didn't simply inspire, it helped shape an entire generation of artists. Yet no one could have imagined that the very guitar he carried through life would witness his final moments under the stage lights. May 17, 1996. Yokohama, Japan. The theater was packed, the lights blazing, Watson's guitar riffs surging through the air. The crowd hung on every note, hypnotized as his fingers danced effortlessly across the strings. It was a flawless performance, until fate stepped in. At 8:37 p.m., in the middle of a blazing solo, Watson suddenly froze. His eyes widened. His hand began to tremble. Then, in a single heartbreaking moment, his body collapsed, the guitar crashing to the floor with a sharp, hollow thud. The room went silent. The band stopped playing. Bandmates rushed forward, grabbing him, calling his name, shaking his still body. But there was no response. His pulse was fading. His breathing barely there. Medics rushed the stage and fought desperately to revive him, but the battle was already lost. At 8:51 p.m., the official word came down. Johnny Guitar Watson was gone. A sudden heart attack had taken him. Yokohama, once remembered as one of his most electrifying stages, had become the place where the music stopped forever. The audience didn't leave right away. They stood frozen, staring at the empty stage, hoping against hope for one more note, one more miracle. But the guitar would never sing again. Florence Griffith Joyner. Florence Griffith Joyner. The Queen of Speed falls asleep forever. Florence Griffith Joyner was a name that left the world in awe. Flo-Jo wasn't just an athlete, she was a living legend of the track. The woman who held the untouchable 100-meter and 200-meter records. Her flowing hair, daring uniforms, and lightning speed turned her into a symbol of power, style, and total dominance. But one silent seizure in the night ended it all. Morning. September 21, 1998. Mission Viejo, California. The sky was as clear and calm as ever. Inside a quiet home, a final chapter closed without a sound. The night before, Flo-Jo had returned home after a busy day, showing no sign of trouble. But as dawn crept in, something was terribly wrong. At 6 a.m., her husband, Al Joyner, woke up. Flo Jo lay still in bed, her face strangely peaceful. He called her name and gently shook her. No response. No pulse. No breath. Panic rushed in. A desperate 911 call shattered the silence. At 6:12 a.m., the ambulance arrived, but every effort was futile. Florence Griffith Joyner was gone. A heavy stillness filled the house. The woman who once made the world hold its breath with her breathtaking sprints could not outrun this final race with death. Investigators later revealed that a seizure in her sleep had caused her to suffocate. A death so sudden, no warning, no chance to fight back. That day, the world of sports lost a legend who could never be replaced. Her records still stand untouched, but the woman who set them has finished her final run forever. Rebop Kwakaba. Rebop Kwakaba. The final moments on the Stockholm stage. Rebop Kwakaba, a true percussion visionary, was the man who fused the deep pulse of African rhythm with the rising wave of modern rock. Performing alongside legendary bands like Traffic and Wings, he carved his name into music history with a style that was raw, soulful, and electrifying. But fate would end his journey in the very place he lived for most, the stage. January 12, 1983. Stockholm, Sweden. The night pulsed with wild energy, drums thundered, guitars roared, and the breath of the entire audience seemed to move as one living force. At center stage sat Rebop, hands flying across the drums like a storm unleashed, every beat bursting with unstoppable life. Then, suddenly, something no one expected happened. 10:17 p.m. In the middle of a blazing solo, Rebop's body suddenly stiffened. A sharp, unbearable pain ripped through his head. His hands began to tremble. The rhythm staggered, and then, like a mighty tree struck down by an unseen blow, Rebop collapsed onto the stage. The band fell silent. The entire hall froze. For a moment, no one understood, was this part of the show, or was something terribly wrong? His bandmates rushed to his side. Rebop lay motionless. His breathing grew weaker with every passing second. Someone from the audience climbed onto the stage, trying desperately to help, but there was nothing anyone could do. More than 30 minutes later, the truth was confirmed. Rebop Kwakaba had died from a sudden brain hemorrhage. That night, Stockholm witnessed an ending no one could have imagined. Rebop's drums went silent, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. A legend fell exactly where he belonged, on the stage, where every beat he ever played once shook the world. Rick James. Rick James. A legend fading in the final glow of a once blazing crown. He was the undisputed king of funk, the man who flipped the 1980s on its head with his fearless swagger, electrifying grooves, and a reckless live-for-the-moment spirit. His life had already plunged through the darkness of addiction and prison, yet he fought his way back, determined to stand beneath the spotlight once more. Recent performances proved the fire inside him still burned fiercely, but his body was telling a quieter, darker truth. August 6, 2004. Los Angeles. A suffocating summer morning. Inside his sprawling mansion, Rick James lay motionless in the bed he never wanted to leave after the music stopped and the party faded. Just hours earlier, he had been full of energy, convinced he still controlled everything, even the dull, stubborn ache tightening in his chest. But his heart had other plans. 9:30 a.m. His assistant knocked on the bedroom door. No answer. The heavy silence felt wrong. Slowly, the door opened. Rick James lay completely still, eyes closed, not a single breath moving his chest. A frantic 911 call followed, but in truth, the moment had already passed. 9:52 a.m. paramedics arrived and rushed to revive him, trying every method they knew. Nothing worked. The king of funk was gone, quietly and painfully alone. Later reports confirmed heart failure as the cause. Traces of several drugs, cocaine, methamphetamine, and diazepam, were found in his system, though none in lethal amounts. It was simply that after years of relentless excess, Rick James's heart had finally reached its limit. Shock G, found lifeless in a cold hotel room. Shock G was a pillar of hip-hop history. Not only the visionary leader of Digital Underground, He was also the man who first discovered and helped launch Tupac Shakur into the world. With his quirky genius and fearless creativity, he carved a permanent mark on music through unforgettable hits like the Humpty Dance. A brilliant artist, a gifted producer, yet also a complicated soul, often drifting between inspiration and isolation, living in his own universe of rhythm and reflection until his final breath. April 22, 2021. Tampa, Florida. Room 333 of a quiet hotel. It wasn't just where Shock G slept. In his final days, it had become his creative refuge. 4 p.m. A hotel staff member knocked on the door. Checkout time had already passed, but inside there was only an unsettling silence. When the door finally opened, Shock G lay on the bed, completely still. No movement, no response. His laptop continued looping an unfinished track. The room felt heavy, thick with the suffocating stillness of death. Just 15 minutes later, paramedics arrived. They checked for a pulse, but there was none. Later reports confirmed the cause, a drug overdose. No one knew how much he had taken, only that his body could no longer endure. There was no chaos in his passing. No noise. Just a quiet exit. But that silence would become the most haunting part of all. A musical genius, gone, surrounded by songs he never got to finish. Gerald Levert. Gerald Levert. A quiet ending inside his own home. Gerald Levert, an artist whose name became synonymous with soul-soaked ballads, possessed a voice that could shake a room and melt a heart at the same time. From his early triumphs with the group Levert to a blazing solo career, he was the man who poured raw emotion into every lyric, leaving audiences spellbound. Yet behind the spotlight and applause, his life was a relentless grind, weighed down by pressure and haunted by crippling headaches that rarely gave him peace. On the night of November 9, 2006, in Cleveland, Ohio, he was still in the studio, polishing the final touches on songs for a new project, quietly brushing aside the pain. No one in that room could have imagined it would be the last time his voice filled the air. The next morning he returned home, drained after months of non-stop work. The throbbing pain lingered, a warning that his body had been pushed too far. Like he had done many times before, he reached for painkillers. One pill, then another. He believed a long sleep would reset everything, that tomorrow would bring relief. But this time, tomorrow never came. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, his assistant stopped by and called out to him. Silence. When the bedroom door finally opened, Gerald Levert lay motionless on the bed. His phone was still in his hand, as if he had meant to call someone, but never got the chance. He had died from an overdose of pain medication, a dangerous combination of prescription drugs. No one could have imagined that the very medicine that once helped him push through the pain would ultimately be the thing that took his life. Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett. A fall at the very moment of his comeback. Wilson Pickett was a name no soul fan could ever forget. His voice carried the fire of rock in every note, turning songs like In the Midnight Hour and Mustang Sally into timeless anthems. After years away from the spotlight, he was preparing for a return. A new music project had just been completed, and he was ready to write the final chapter of a remarkable career. But fate had other plans. January 19, 2006. Reston, Virginia. Pickett's home was filled with quiet excitement. He sat in the living room, leaning back in his chair, eyes glowing as he imagined the road ahead. A calm, satisfied smile rested on his face. Then suddenly, a crushing pain gripped his chest. In a single instant, everything changed. Wilson Pickett collapsed. The glass in his hand shattered against the floor with a cold, echoing crack. He tried to move, tried to call for help, his voice breaking in the silence, but no one was there. The house that once pulsed with music fell into a terrifying stillness. Just 15 minutes later, a family member found him, but it was already too late. Hope had slipped away. His death was the quiet result of time and a body worn down by years of living hard. The man who once shook the world with a voice full of thunder left it in silence. No more stages. No more lights. Only an empty room, and a song that would never be finished. Isaac Hayes. Isaac Hayes, moving to the relentless rhythm of life. Isaac Hayes wasn't just a singer or a songwriter, he was a legend. A man who reshaped the sound of soul music, gifting the world unforgettable masterpieces like Theme from Shaft, earning an Academy Award, and mesmerizing millions across generations. Even at 65, his fire hadn't faded. He had just finished working on a new music project, still driven by the same passion that built his legacy. No one could have imagined that only hours later, his journey would come to a sudden and irreversible end. On the afternoon of August 10, 2008, Memphis felt peaceful, just another quiet summer day. Inside his home, Isaac Hayes relaxed with his family after months of relentless work. Yet for a man like him, slowing down was never easy. Following his usual routine, he walked into his home gym and stepped onto the treadmill he knew so well. The belt began to move beneath his feet, step after step, his heart rate climbing. Just another ordinary workout. But then something changed. A wave of dizziness struck without warning. The room seemed to spin. His strength vanished in an instant. His body collapsed, unable to fight back. He fell to the floor, motionless. The room grew eerily silent. The treadmill kept humming, but Isaac Hayes no longer moved. Nearly an hour later, a family member entered the room and discovered him lying unconscious on the ground. Panic filled the house. Calls for help were made in desperation. The piercing wail of an ambulance shattered the calm Memphis afternoon, but time had already slipped away. At 2:35 p.m., a doctor delivered the devastating news to the family. Isaac Hayes was gone. The cause, a stroke. A sudden, tragic end for a man who seemed so strong, so vibrant. The artist whose music once electrified the world now lay still beside the quiet hum of a treadmill, his legendary voice silenced forever. Reggie White. Reggie White. A tragic end in the heart of the Christmas season. Reggie White was an iconic force in football, a nightmare for opposing offenses, and one of the greatest defensive players the NFL has ever seen. 2 Super Bowl championships. 13 Pro Bowl selections. His legendary career spoke for itself. Even after retirement, millions still admired and respected him. But on a bitter winter morning, a sudden collapse changed everything. December 26, 2004. While the world was still wrapped in the warmth of Christmas joy, Reggie White woke up at his home in Cornelius, North Carolina. It seemed like an ordinary day, a quiet and peaceful morning, until fate intervened. Around 6:30 a.m., a sharp pain shot through his chest. Sudden. Intense. No warning at all. The massive frame that once dominated the gridiron suddenly weakened. He staggered, reaching for something to steady himself, but his legs failed him. And then he crashed hard to the floor. His family rushed to him immediately. Panic filled the room. A frantic call to 911 shattered the silence. Paramedics raced to the house as quickly as possible, but time had already slipped away. At 7:04 a.m., Reggie White was pronounced dead. An arrhythmia, an invisible, silent killer he never even knew he carried, had taken his life in a single devastating moment. The man who once terrified his rivals, known as the Minister of Defense, was ultimately betrayed by his own heart. Godfrey Cambridge. Godfrey Cambridge. A life of laughter ending in a moment no one expected. On stage and on screen, Cambridge was a towering force in comedy. With razor-sharp satire and powerful acting talent, he lit up theaters and television, becoming one of the most successful black entertainers of his era. But just as his career reached its peak, fate abruptly wrote its final line. November 29, 1976. The set of Victory at Entebbe, Burbank, California. The studio buzzed with energy, lights blazing, cameras ready, crew preparing a key scene. Cambridge arrived as he always did, though this time he seemed tired. Still, he carried that familiar smile, though a careful observer might have sensed something wrong in the way he moved. Around 12:45 p.m., filming began. He stood ready to deliver his line. Then suddenly everything stopped. A faint frown. A puzzled look. His hand moved to his chest as his breathing grew heavy, and in the next instant he collapsed. Panic swept the set. Voices shouted. Crew rushed in trying to help, but he remained still, unresponsive. Hours later, at 10:07 p.m., a doctor confirmed the truth. Godfrey Cambridge had died right there on set at just 43. A sudden heart attack was the cause. They say the stage is an artist's home, and Cambridge left this world beneath its lights. His laughter will echo forever in the hearts of those who loved him. Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory. A final bow beneath a familiar smile. Dick Gregory wasn't just a comedian, he was a warrior, both on stage and in the streets. He turned laughter into a weapon against injustice, transforming humor into a razor-sharp tool in the battle for equality. For more than half a century, Gregory became an icon, a fearless voice that refused to be silenced. On the evening of August 18, 2017, he stood before hundreds of fans once again. His voice still carried the weight of truth, every word cutting straight to the injustices he had spent a lifetime exposing. After nearly 2 hours, he closed with a gentle joke and that unmistakable smile. No one in the room could have imagined it would be the last time they'd see him like that. The next morning, August 19, 2017, he collapsed at home. A sudden pain tore through his chest, and the book in his hands slipped to the floor. At 12:51 p.m., his family found him, but by then it was too late. Dick Gregory was gone, bringing an end to an 84-year journey of relentless courage and activism. The heart that had beaten so fiercely for justice had finally fallen silent. Yet the legacy he left behind will never disappear. Aaron Spears. Aaron Spears. The drumbeat cut off without warning. Aaron Spears wasn't just a gifted drummer, he was a legend musicians spoke about with reverence. His thunderous grooves once shook the stages of the world's biggest artists. Passion, energy, pure creative fire. He carried it all in every strike of the drum. Yet even that fire couldn't hold life in place forever. On the morning of October 30, 2023, Aaron Spears' home felt unusually still. His drum kit waited quietly, sticks resting within reach, but no rhythm echoed through the room. At 10:37 a.m., he sent one last text. Moments later, someone nearby heard a faint sound, perhaps a drumstick slipping from his hand, or the uneasy stumble of a final step. Then came a sharp pain and a sudden collapse. No one knows exactly what happened in that moment. Only that when they found him, Aaron Spears lay motionless beside the very drums that once carried his heartbeat to the world. George Brown. George Brown, the final melody of a legend. George "Funky" Brown wasn't just the drummer of Kool and the Gang. He was the heartbeat of the band. With electric grooves and fearless rhythm, he forged timeless funk anthems that kept millions moving to the beat. But even legends cannot outrun time. November 16, 2023. A quiet morning. George woke in the home he knew so well, a place once filled with the echoes of rehearsals and late-night jams. His drumsticks lay on the table, but the room was silent. After a sudden, violent coughing fit brought on by lung cancer, he paused. For a moment, everything stopped. The pain was no longer only in his lungs. It spread through him, stealing the air from every breath. He remained seated, head gently tilted, eyes closed as if resting after one final rehearsal. But this time, he would not wake again. Unseen by the world, he passed quietly in his room around 10 a.m. It wasn't until noon, when his family found him, that the silence finally shattered into grief. Malik B, and suddenly the rhythm fades. Malik B, a legendary force within the Roots, once electrified the world with razor-sharp rhymes and gritty, street-born soul. But as the spotlight slowly dimmed, he became quieter, more mysterious, appearing only now and then for passion-driven projects that still carried his unmistakable fire. No one imagined his latest recording session would be the final verse of his story. On July 26, 2020, Malik B was still inside the studio, his deep voice echoing through the microphone. The lyrics he delivered were heavy with feeling, almost haunting, like a warning hidden between the bars. Those around him noticed he looked exhausted, but no one believed it meant something serious. When he walked out of the studio that night, there was no hint it would be the last time. 3 days later, a relative came by his home. They knocked. No answer. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the house felt unnervingly still. His laptop remained open, an unfinished track looping softly in the silence. And there, in the quiet room, Malik B lay motionless. His official cause of death was never publicly confirmed, though many believe a stroke or drug-related incident may have taken the gifted artist far too soon. David Ruffin. David Ruffin. A golden voice forever silenced in the dark. David Ruffin, the unforgettable soul of the Temptations, once ruled the world with songs that seemed destined to live forever. But after the spotlight faded came years lost to addiction and painful choices. Philadelphia, June 1, 1991. Just another wild night at a lavish party. No one in that room could have imagined they were witnessing the final moments of a legend. David Ruffin arrived with his familiar grin, laughing, joking, and moving easily through the crowd of friends. Then, in the middle of the celebration, something changed. He suddenly staggered. His hand reached for the edge of a table as if trying to steady himself, then his body collapsed to the floor. The music faded into stunned silence. People rushed toward him, shaking him, calling his name. But there was no response. When paramedics finally arrived, there was nothing left to do. They could only confirm the heartbreaking truth no one was ready to hear. David Ruffin was gone. Later, the cause was revealed, a fatal drug overdose. Heavy D, collapsing at his own front door. A hip-hop legend whose booming voice and magnetic presence once lit stages on fire. His hits helped define a generation, and no one imagined that only days after his final performance, his story would end so abruptly. On November 8, 2011, Heavy D returned to his Beverly Hills home. There were no warning signs, nothing that seemed unusual. But as he reached his front door, he suddenly froze, then collapsed. A haunting silence filled the moment. Bystanders rushed in, desperate to help, but it was already too late. Heavy D never regained consciousness. Doctors later revealed the cause. A pulmonary embolism complication, a deadly blood clot that blocked the artery in his lung, stealing his life in a single, devastating instant. Reggie Warren. A life cut short after the stage lights faded. Reggie Warren, the golden voice of the legendary R&B group Troop, once carried a generation on the warmth of his timeless hits. Though years of devotion had slowly worn down his health, he never stopped performing, determined to keep sharing joy with the fans who loved him. Tragically, only hours after delivering an emotional show, he was gone forever. March 14, 2021. Reggie Warren returned home after a performance. Exhausted, yet deeply fulfilled, he eased himself into a chair. Then, within minutes, a crushing pain surged through his chest. His breathing grew uneven. His heart pounded wildly, out of rhythm. He tried to rise, but his legs failed him. A brief, desperate struggle. Then he fell. Fighting for air, he managed to dial 911. But by the time help arrived, the moment had already passed. The cause was heart failure, sudden and overwhelming, leaving him no chance to resist. Fred Neil, collapsing beneath the weight of his own glorious past. Fred Curly Neil, the legendary Harlem Globetrotter, dazzled the world with hypnotic dribbles and unmatched showmanship. He wasn't just a basketball player. He was an artist who painted magic across the hardwood. But one fateful morning changed everything. March 26, 2020. Houston, Texas. Curly woke up like he had thousands of mornings before, stepping into a living room lined with memories of a lifetime in the spotlight. His eyes lingered on an old photo with his teammates, and a quiet smile crossed his face. Then suddenly, his body froze. In the next heartbeat, the once unshakable frame of a basketball icon crashed to the floor like a mighty oak cut down in silence. A stroke struck with terrifying speed. In seconds, the life of a legend slipped away, leaving him no chance to call for help. By the time he was discovered, it was already too late. Nell Carter. A sudden collapse after years of quiet, relentless struggle. Nell Carter, a remarkable actress who conquered both Broadway and Hollywood, captivated millions with her powerhouse voice and effortless humor. But behind the dazzling stage lights, she fought a far different battle. Diabetes and heart disease slowly wore her down, forcing her to carry a burden of silent pain for years. Still, She endured with courage until January 23, 2003. Beverly Hills. An ordinary morning. Nell woke as she always did, her home still filled with echoes of a brilliant career, her Tony Award gleaming softly, worn scripts stacked with memories, photographs beside beloved colleagues. Yet something felt different that day. Her body suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Her legs trembled and lost their strength. And in one fragile, terrifying moment, Nell collapsed to the floor. A devastating stroke, the final blow from years of illness, swept through her body like an unstoppable storm. There was no time to fight back. No moment to recover. When loved ones finally reached her, the voice that once filled theaters with life had fallen silent. A brilliant star had slipped away in the quiet. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass. Even the strongest resilience can bow to fate. The golden voice of R&B once made the world melt with his commanding love songs. After a devastating accident left him paralyzed, he refused to surrender, continuing to sing and challenge destiny with unbreakable determination. Yet even the fiercest warrior eventually runs out of strength. January 13, 2010. Philadelphia. A bitter winter night. Teddy's room lay wrapped in darkness, the only sound the faint rhythm of his shallow breathing breaking the silence. Respiratory failure had haunted him for years, but never quite like this. Then a crushing wave of breathlessness struck without mercy. Teddy sensed it immediately. This time was different. It felt as if an unseen hand was slowly tightening its grip. His body finally surrendered, and the room fell into absolute stillness. His final breath slipped quietly into the night, closing the chapter on a life marked by soaring triumphs and profound struggles. Chadwick Boseman. Chadwick Boseman. The sudden loss of a true warrior. A symbol of strength in Hollywood, Boseman turned Black Panther into a global legend while quietly fighting a 4-year battle with cancer that no one knew about. He kept filming, kept performing, kept standing tall, on screen and in life, waging a silent war within his own body without a single complaint. The truth only emerged after his passing on August 28, 2020. Los Angeles, a quiet and fateful night. His room sat wrapped in stillness. Cancer had slowly taken its toll, yet his eyes still carried the same fierce determination that defined his life. His family held his hand tightly. No chaos, no cries, only a deep, solemn peace in his final moments. Their eyes moved between him and the ticking clock. At 9:32 p.m., his heart fell silent. When the news reached the world, disbelief spread everywhere. The hero people admired had been fighting alone all along, giving everything he had to his final performances for the fans he loved. Tom Lister Jr., a terrifying silence inside a locked house. Known to fans as Tiny Lister, the towering man with the icy, piercing stare terrified audiences with unforgettable villain roles that seemed larger than life. Off-screen, however, he was known for his discipline and dedication. He loved acting deeply and was never late to set. Yet on that fateful day, something felt wrong. He never arrived. His phone kept ringing. Messages remained unread. At first, no one imagined this silence was the beginning of an irreversible tragedy. December 10, 2020. A quiet, somber afternoon that would mark the final chapter in the life of a Hollywood legend. The day before, Tiny Lister had been feeling unwell, but he wasn't the type to complain or slow down. He pushed through the fatigue, determined to keep working as he always had. But this time, his body refused to cooperate. When the film crew arrived at his home and received no answer, even though his phone could be heard ringing inside, a wave of fear swept over them. Something was terribly wrong. They called the police. When the door was finally forced open, the scene inside stunned everyone. Tiny Lister Jr. lay motionless on the floor. He was gone. The cause of death was later confirmed as complications from COVID-19 and heart disease, a chilling reminder of how suddenly life can change. These remarkable individuals left an unforgettable mark on the world, and their sudden losses still haunt fans today. They once stood at the peak of fame, radiant, powerful, seemingly untouchable. Yet in a single, tragic moment, everything was taken away. Which story shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next shocking stories hidden behind the glitter and glamour of Hollywood.